I'll let you know. Again, yeah. Okay. So now we're doing part two of this discussion. The first one we went on for around an hour, and I just wanted to make a new video for the continuation. So where were we? We were talking about Confucianism and collectivism and Mao and all that stuff, and just obedience to authority. And I find that just very, very different from the West, especially America. I find for example, you'll see, especially now, people burning the flag or disrespecting the U.S. flag or kneeling during the national anthem to make a statement, or just showing disrespect. And in China, you never see that, and I think you could be punished for that. Like, I wasn't it recently in Hong Kong, they passed a bill that you can't disrespect the mainland national anthem at sporting events. Like, they actually passed a law about that.
Yeah, I did. I read that. It was about a year ago, was it? Or 6 months, maybe?
Maybe 6 months. I think it was this year. But you see, and this is the thing too that's interesting about mainland and their uniqueness, because you look at Hong Kong and they are Chinese people, but they're not on board with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. They don't like what's happening. There's been lots of resistance and protesters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's all been growing there, hasn't it, for some time?
Yeah.
Cool.
So Hong Kong is a different beast, in my opinion, and I've been there a few times, and Hong Kong and mainland China are very, very different. There's some cultural overlap, but I think Hong Kong's a lot more advanced in a lot of ways.
I think, though, that China could do. You got to think that in the 80s, during Tiananmen, the students were quite rebellious and seditious. Yeah,
good point.
They'd got ideas from outside. They were idealistic, completely different from the students now, to the extent that they were protesting.
Yeah,
and it's kind of similar to Hong Kong.
That's a
But
good point.
through 30 years of just intense nationalism, the nationalism was up since Tiananmen, and just making sure that students are busy studying all the time. Look what they've done to them.
Yeah,
Got these
yeah.
eating, sleeping.
Yeah, and I think that's very deliberate, and I think a lot of it had to do with Tiananmen. And I think a lot of students are unaware of what actually happened. I think a lot of them don't even know that it happened.
Yeah, none of them. Yeah, when you talk to them about it, a lot of them don't. When you actually question.
Well, and you can't really talk about them in school. Are you aware of the expression, the three T's of China, the three T's you don't talk about in class?
Tiananmen, Taiwan, and what's the other one?
I think Tibet.
Tibet, is it? Yeah.
And we've talked about all three in this discussion. Like, this discussion would be taboo.
Okay.
This discussion would be taboo in China.
I get denied a visa.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. Although I'm not too hard on China, about Tibet, and I don't really care about Taiwan. And it's just historical facts that I'm interested in, and explaining what's happening, thinking about why it happened. But I just think
it's interesting that it's always interesting to me when you look at a society to figure out what are the taboos, what are the things we're not allowed or discouraged from discussing. And again, among foreign teachers in China, they always say, especially to new teachers, don't talk about the three T's. Like, for example, again, in Beijing, I worked with a guy from Canada, older guy, and he was pretty loud and outspoken. And he actually, during one of the classes, I don't know the specifics, but he started talking about Taiwan, and I think he was saying, well, Taiwan's independent, or it's not part of China, and they have their own flag, and it's, and then the students, and this will happen if you break a taboo, the students without hesitation will report you. So he actually got reported to the school, and then they asked him to sign like a warning letter, like this is an official warning, basically 2 strikes you're out. You know, if you do it again, we'll fire you. And he was really, really upset about it, and so he just resigned because he thought it was ridiculous. But that is something I would say teachers going to China, if they've never been, need to be aware of, is that, you know, you don't necessarily have the same freedom of speech you might back home, and you can't really talk about controversial things or anything that would be perceived of as like negative or critical of China or the Chinese government. Like this is another. Are you familiar with the phrase glass heart? Like Chinese people have a glass heart, very fragile.
Yeah, of course. I know
Right.
subject. Yeah.
And again, this is another fundamental difference, I think, is again, like I feel like in the West, especially with like Western philosophy, when I've looked at, you know, Socrates and Plato and the ancient Greeks, there was a lot of self-criticism. And I think we do that again, like almost to an extreme where we're hypercritical of ourselves. And generally, I think it's good to be critical. But again, I think this is the opposite of China. It's like they can't endure any criticism, even if it's constructive. Like they're very, very anti. You know, like again, losing face and this whole thing about China trying to cover up the coronavirus and pretend nothing happened, and they're silencing the whistleblowers and the doctors because they just, you know, anything that would be critical of them, it just seems like that's their kryptonite. Whereas I feel like in the West we embrace it, but again, I think to the opposite extreme, and I think both are harmful, and you know, both cultures should sort of find a middle ground. Like China be able to endure some criticism and engage in some self-criticism, and I think sometimes the West needs to relax a bit and realize that, you know, we do need to acknowledge history, but we also need to look at the good parts of history and all the good things our cultures have done, and have some pride instead of just guilt. Like again, I feel like right now China they overemphasize pride and the West overemphasizes guilt. And to me, these are two polar extremes, and I don't really like either myself.
You got to think who in the West is emphasising guilt. What people are doing that. It's in the higher institutions. It's in the school curriculums. But it's not across the board. But it's just in key positions that they're doing that, you know, and trying to put it onto young minds.
And it's like the total opposite. Again, it's like the universities in China are saying, you know, love and defend China at all costs. And I get the sense that in the West, again, it's almost the opposite. I don't know to what degree, but there is a lot more activism coming out of Western universities, and people, you know, instead of being patriotic, there's more, you know, just again, guilt. And again, you see all these statues of founding fathers being defaced, almost like our own cultural revolution. And it didn't work out well in China, and I don't think it would work out well in America or England.
Yeah, well, I was speaking to a Chinese girl, and she said, I love China. And she said, I don't know why, but I love it more and more and more. And I said, yeah, why? And she couldn't really give a good reason. She couldn't really give a good reason. So it was nationalism, but their nationalism really is all right. Everyone likes their country for some reason. They go to the architecture, the art, language, or whatever. But their nationalism really is geared towards the 100 years of humiliation. It's against foreigners. As nationalism often is, it's about protecting, safeguarding, often a racial homogeneity. And it's definitely territorial as well, as like with Taiwan and Tibet. Yeah, so it's all geared towards that. So I can't help but think it will be antagonistic the more powerful they become. And it's only rhetoric when they say they're going to be harmonious. They always use that word, harmony.
Yeah, so peace,
they have been, except for this virus thing, you know, keeping the airport open, international flights. definitely suggests weaponizing the virus while closing down domestic flights. It's just
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's anyway. We're getting into the weeds a bit. I enjoy this, but let me get back on track. So yeah, I think we covered a lot of issues about face collectivism, Confucianism. So I hope that's useful. Let's see. We did some comparison and contrast. Now I want to get back to being a teacher specifically, because again, the intended audience I have in mind is either experienced teachers who might be considering going to China in the future, or maybe just new teachers. They've just come out, they want to go to China for a year, and this could give them some sort of insight from experienced teachers like us. Or again, just anybody in general who's curious might enjoy this. But yeah, let's talk about some stuff that might be a little bit less abstract and more practical for new teachers or new teachers to China. Let me ask you, we talked about this a little bit, but maybe we can go into more detail. What were some obstacles you encountered as a teacher in China, and how did you overcome those obstacles?
As a teacher,
Yeah, as a teacher, not as like a travel agent or just a person in China, but specifically as a teacher. What were some obstacles you had? I'll give you one example, and then you can take it from there. For me, just the lack of organization and planning ahead. Everything is last minute. It always feels unorganized. It is not uncommon in China to get your class schedule literally like the night before class. It could be a Sunday night, and then you finally get your schedule for the semester and realize you have classes the next day.
yeah, that it was disorganized, exactly as you said. Yeah, that's true.
And I feel like things are rarely planned ahead. I always feel like everything's at the last minute, and then like everyone's running around in a panic, like the day before a deadline, and it's like, well, why didn't you start working on this a week or two ago? And again, I think this is something that comes from European cultures, and I don't know if this is accurate or not. This is a little bit of speculation, but I think, in like Western Europe and Scandinavia, these winters, and people had to plan for these winters to survive. So there was a lot of thinking ahead. And I'm wondering if that might be a factor with our civilization and our planning ahead culture. And China just doesn't seem to have that. They don't. But in another way, they do. They do seem to have these long-term, 100-year plans and strategies. So maybe like in a macro sense, in a grand sense, they are looking very, very long-term down the road. But in a lot of day-to-day affairs, I find they're just completely unorganized and not really. They might be planning again on a big scale for 100 years in the future, but they're not thinking about next week.
Yeah, that's. You wonder that it's okay writing a plan out. And communists have often done that anyway. These plans, but how are they enacted? But I've got to say, their plans have come to fruition since opening up. But I think since Xi's been in control, this economic downturn, is as low as when it first opened up in '78. The economic growth is as low as 1978 or 79. I get confused between the two. I think it was 79 opening
Yeah,
up.
something like that.
Wonder what their plan is now. I really don't know where China's going to go as manufacturing moves to other countries, especially after this virus. And no one's really
Yeah.
given me an answer. They've said, well, they're going to go into AI. Apparently, they're preeminent with it, AI. But AI means creating robots to do jobs that the peasantry or the lower classes would do. So what are those people going to do? And someone said to me, well, they'll make the robots. And I don't know. That doesn't quite fit. I don't know
I
what I
guess
think
we'll
this is.
I,
Yeah.
I guess we'll find out, yeah. But anyway, I want to get back. I want to stay on script with this one. What would you say are some obstacles you encountered as a teacher, like specifically in the classroom? What were some challenges? We talked about it a little bit, like sometimes a blandness. But what are some other things you encountered that maybe were a little bit challenging, or surprising things you had to deal with? Did you ever have any problems or obstacles, or do you think it was always smooth sailing?
All getting them to talk was the main one, and even to the extent where you ask them to stand up, talk, and they start crying. It's like, what?
Crying,
Yeah,
really?
one student cried before. So
Now, why
they're
do you think that is? Why do you think that is?
just being looked at by the whole class and being ashamed of their language levels. Like, okay,
So
sit down.
do you think that's related to face then?
Yeah, but I suppose it's a universal sense of embarrassment. You know, a lot of people might want to cry in every culture. I don't know. Is it the melodrama's big in China? I think.
Mm.
Yeah, there's no doubt she was embarrassed. There were real feelings, but no need to cry. It's
But
even more.
that's again a thing I find between East and West is I feel like in America people are often eager to have attention and be at the front of the class. Some people are shy, but you have a lot of extroverts in the West who they want to participate, they want to get the attention. Some people they don't care if they make mistakes or fumble the ball. Like I feel like again in the West we're sort of told you're going to make mistakes along the way and don't worry about it. You fall down, you bruise your knee, you get back up, you keep trying, you know. And I don't feel like they really have that in China. It's like you either know it or you don't, or you can do it or you can't. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of thinking about, well, it's a process, and obviously you're not going to be as good as a native speaker, and obviously part of the learning process is making mistakes and falling down, but you get back up. Practice makes perfect. Like I feel like that is a big part of our Western psyche, and I don't really sense that in China, especially in the classroom.
Um, yeah, well, it's hard to sense anything, Brandon, isn't it? When they don't say much.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, they're still going to work. They're going to make mistakes in their study life anyway. So I don't believe it's like you either know it or you don't. And I believe China, the way it's come up, the way it's growing, is they're definitely working towards surpassing the West in a lot of things. Although they're a long way from it, but in some things they have. With their train system and their undergrounds and WeChat Pay, they have surpassed us, and I do believe that's what they want to do, and they know they're going to make mistakes along the way. So yeah, I don't believe the rule fits all, but on an independent basis, yeah, they definitely don't want to make their mistakes again to do with face. They don't want to make them public, do they?
I think it's in public. That's the thing. If people make mistakes in public, again, there's this shame, this loss of face, and and I'm not saying that doesn't exist in the West at all. People care about image and reputation and things like that, but I just feel like it's so much more strong in China than in the West. Like it just they seem to focus a lot more again on appearances, whereas again I think in the West we have just these like sayings like don't judge a book by its cover, it's what's on the inside that counts. Like I think we put a lot of emphasis on substance, and we talk about, well, things are not what they seem, appearance and reality. But I feel like in China, it's all about just surface level image. Who cares about the book? It's all about the cover, not the content, not the substance. And I find a lot of things in China to be very just superficial. And that's why sometimes I think it's hard to have interesting discussions. Even if their English is really good and they're cultured, I still find there's like a shallowness there.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's sort of like almost like a bovine, sort of animalistic route through life. So I hear him say, "Oh, I eating and sleeping." It's just like an unthinking fucking passage. Sorry for the language. An
That's fine.
unthinking passage. And yeah, I once had a conversation with a Chinese guy who was a lawyer, and he was an international fella. Had a lot of money. But he was very well read. That's what he liked to do. And he was often in hotel rooms where he flew around the world and he'd read. Read on planes. And we were talking
Great.
about Stalingrad for about and the Eastern Front for about 2 hours, World War II. And he said, and we were in a coffee bar, and he said, you look around you, he said, any of these people here, it's all Chinese, he said, wouldn't be able to talk what we were talking about. He said, it's simply because they don't read. They don't read by their own, by their own choice. And I did read an article by an Indian who was on a plane going to China, and he noticed all the Chinese around him were not reading books. They're all on their smartphones or watching the TV on the plane. And he sort of said that was remarkable. So he did a study of it, and I think China is one of the lowest readerships in the world, at least for countries that have books. You know, I'm not talking about really poverty-stricken countries in Africa, but in the developed.
They seem to like study a lot, but they don't seem to do a lot of recreational reading, like pursuing knowledge for its own sake. And again, this is I think a difference in the psyche is I think they're very goal oriented. You know, like I think in the West, again, we have these sayings like it's the journey that matters, not the destination. It's the process. You know, knowledge for its own sake, learning for its own sake. But I feel like in China, it's always about, well, I have to get good grades to get a degree, to get a good job, to get status and to get money. And that's where it's never knowledge for its own sake, or maybe not never, but it feels like it's always for a goal to achieve something and never for its own sake. I'll read this book if I have to for class because it'll lead to achieving these goals, but it's not something I would do for my own personal enrichment. They don't seem to have that sense of doing things for personal enrichment. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do agree, but they also don't have much time for it. How much study they have to do? My students in Fujian wake up at 7. I think their classes start 7:30. They don't stop until 10 p.m. I mean, got time to read a book after that. And then
I've wondered too if that's deliberate. You know, it's like keep them so busy and occupied and distracted that they don't have time, their thoughts to wander into uncharted territory or unapproved territory. You know what I mean? It does seem like a form of mind control.
Yeah, it's just engulf them with duty, isn't it? So they've got no time for anything else. But it defeats the purpose. You just have they can't retain information.
Well, they're not really taught to think in Chinese schools. Again, I think a lot of it is just they're indoctrinated. They're programmed. They deal with all this propaganda. They have to memorize it and recite it. And it's not critical thinking. It's not innovation or originality or self-criticism. It is just kind of like stay busy, memorize this, China good, China good, foreigner bad, nationalism. You know what I mean? And that's not what we think of as education in the West. Although some might argue we're becoming more like that than we have been traditionally.
But think of what would happen if they did open up and they did allow more critical thinking. Yeah, I think it would definitely engender some.
I think it'd be great. I think they would flourish a lot more than they are. I think they would become a better society. I would love it because I think there's a lot of smart and creative people there being maybe suppressed. Maybe they have their own Einsteins and Da Vinci's, and they have through history, of course. But I would love to see some some of the really unique and creative thinkers kind of come to fruition in China, because again, a lot of people, they can talk about I guess like in like contemporary mainstream society, I don't think there's not like a lot of popular Chinese artists or movies or TV shows. Like again, in China they used to like Korean drama, and I think K-pop in the West is becoming popular. Hollywood movies are popular, but I don't feel like currently there's a lot of like Chinese entertainment or pop culture that's exported. Like there doesn't seem to be any, or like Japan, a lot of people like Japanese animation, you know, but I don't feel like China does a lot of that creative entertainment type stuff, or at least nothing that would have broad universal appeal.
No, they don't. Yeah, so they're not gonna. It's another. They say that's another form of imperialism, don't they? With cultural imperialism, but they haven't got it. Not at all. If anything, they're being taking on the culture of other people. As you said,
Right.
it would be good if there was more critical thinking, but I think it would endanger the government, and they're all about keeping their power, and they always have been.
Right.
Every dynasty is
Right.
about. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I think it's deliberate. And I think the word they use is stability. You know, we have to have stability. And that's very, again, I think that's very Confucian in a way, but it's also, and it kind of overlaps with the whole, you know, communistic stay in power element. So it's kind of convenient for the government, I think, because they can sort of fall back and say, oh, you know, Confucian values traditional Chinese society. But I think in reality, it is just maintaining power, if that
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, I agree. But with the problem is in the classroom. Yeah, it was making them talk, and it was feeling that I was useless, to be honest. So I'd write a word. So I love, the English language has the most words of any language. You know, we have the highest vocabulary, largest vocabulary in any language. So I love
Okay.
giving these certain words, and actually it can be a really beautiful language. But you write this stuff on the board, this information. No one would even pull out a pen to write it down. So it's somehow feeling I was an imposter. What I was doing was useless. So by gradations, I mean, I got that impression first of all, but then it was really a strong feeling. Was that I was in a completely pointless job. That was
Ah,
my main problem really, and just being a wage slave, just doing it for the wage.
right, right.
That was it.
And
That
I've
was
and
when.
I've heard that from some teachers, and then some will say, yeah, I'm just a dancing monkey or a white monkey or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Dancing monkey. But it was much nicer working in a university on the mainland for 12 hours.
Yeah.
Fairly nice. It was all they were all female students, and they'd giggle at my unfunny jokes,
Uh huh.
or they'd always be like "hello" universally at the same time as I walked in to the room. But when I was
Right.
teaching one kids, it was a nightmare. Every day was a nightmare, and I had a teaching assistant who, though she was Taiwanese, I do believe was xenophobic and racist towards me because she didn't want to talk to me. She didn't even want to look at me. In 2 years,
Uh
there
huh.
were four different teachers. One of them was a black American before, and apparently he pushed the desk because we shared a desk, and he pushed
Uh
the
huh.
desk to her chest with force, and he was sacked for that. And I thought it was quite disgusting when I heard about it. But then after a month, this woman in Taiwan, and where she wouldn't even talk to me, and I gave up even greeting her in the morning. I could understand why he'd done it because it was like a kind of weird silent treatment. And I only think it was because she didn't like foreigners. And basically, when she was outside of the classroom in Taiwan, the kids were uproarious. They couldn't be
Mm,
controlled. It was like Lord of the
mm.
Flies in there. I'm talking about like they pulling off their clothes, spitting up windows,
Wow.
punching me. It was madness, and there was nothing I could do. All of the techniques, carrot and stick, not a
Uh
literal
huh.
stick, probably would have served the purpose. Um,
So this is
yeah,
kids in Taiwan, right?
yeah, 3 to 4 year old, no, 5 year old.
Uh, but I think that's another thing too that for any teachers that would be listening is obviously you have to factor in the age as well, and you know teaching kids is a lot different from university, and I've worked with all ages over the years, But most of my experience has been with high school, university, adults. That's been the majority. I don't have as much experience with kids. But yeah, a lot of what you're saying, except for what you just said, has resonated. Yeah, again with the kids, I don't have a lot of experience with that, and I don't know if I could handle that.
No,
Um,
I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown.
yeah, I can imagine. And I've had jobs where I felt like, yeah, it was kind of meaningless. Now I've also had jobs that I found very rewarding. Like I worked for a university in Beijing for a few semesters, and I had pretty good students, and I had some really good classes, and I had a lot of fun, and I thought that they had fun, and we had good rapport, and so I've had some really good experiences. And I started working in Zibo in September with middle school and high school kids, and I didn't think I would like middle school, but I've actually had a lot of fun with them. So I've had good and bad experiences, and I imagine anyone in any vocation, you do it long enough, you're going to have, highs and lows and good memories and bad memories. But when you mention like having jobs, and I've heard this a lot, and I've experienced it myself, but you don't feel like you're really doing much, like you're just a figurehead. Again, I feel like it's almost a matter of face, like it's prestige. Like for the school, they like to say we have X number of foreign teachers, and if the parents see white faces or foreign faces, especially white, it adds face, it adds prestige. And I feel like, and again, that's as far as it goes. It's like, oh, they have foreign teachers, awesome.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
that's it. And like, it doesn't matter if the students actually learn anything. It's all about, again, reputation, face, image, prestige. Parents like to brag to other parents. I've heard, oh, well, did you know that my child has a foreign teacher? My student goes to the international school. And again, I'm not saying we don't have a bit of that in the West. A lot of people, I think, could make a good case that we do. I just feel like it's so much stronger. And I feel like in the West, you'd have parents maybe bragging, or students, oh, I go to this prestigious school. But there's also going to be the substance, not just the name. There's also going to be like, but I'm also learning and getting a good education, and or at least a belief. Whereas, again, in China, it's just surface level. It's just, and that's why a lot of schools, I think, will hire teachers and not really think it through, and not really always vet the teachers. And sometimes you get some really bad people as a result. But it's just about, we have this quota, we want to have some foreign teachers, that gives us face. And they don't think beyond that. They don't think about the quality of education, and let's train the teacher, or let's teach them about Chinese culture. And that's part of what I'm trying to do here with these interviews and my research is sort of create something for teachers who might be going to China to get some insight. Because when I first went, I didn't know anything, and being able to hear conversations like this, I think would have really benefited me.
Well, when I have interviews, I had a whole host of interviews for literature and history teaching jobs, and you got a member of staff from the school, and they're asking you, tell me about literature. And I always get the impression that they have no idea what I'm talking about, nor are they interested. They say, and they go, oh, so can you tell me about your teaching method? And it's just like, well, you want a literature teacher,
Right.
I'm someone who can interpret a text and give suggestions about it in quite a dynamic way. But how would they ever know that? And would it be appreciated? I don't know what it is, but
Probably
it's just
not.
exactly as you said. And I work at a school in Fujian, as you know, it's only 3 hours a week. And there's no point in doing it, actually. And I'm just taking the money. But I think it is the reason why they've got foreign teachers is to give it some prestige, like you
Right.
said.
Right.
Because otherwise, it's not going to make a dent in their English studies. 3 hours a week.
I think it might a little bit more than we realize. you know, again, maybe not significantly, but I do think, you know, immersion works. And I imagine anybody, if they're going to a language class a few hours a week, they're going to pick up something. You know, yeah, not everyone's going to become fluent, but some exposure, I think, is better than nothing. Like, again, I would imagine in China, most people at least know some English words, right? But how many people in the United States or the UK know any Chinese words?
Yeah, none.
You know what I mean? Like a lot of people, they can't even pronounce Xi Jinping. Like a lot of people, they see the president Xi XI and they'll say G, and I'm like, no, that's not even how you say it.
I say Z. What? Yeah, Z.
Well, I think X is like an SH. Xi Jinping. Like, you know, Shay Shay is thank you, and that's XIE in Pinyin. Pinyin's like the Roman letter pronunciation of the Chinese characters. And, but yeah, most Americans, like, you know, I think most Americans, if they had, you know, three hours a week of Chinese lessons or Spanish, they're not going to become fluent, but they'll pick something up. And again, most Chinese people, they'll know things like hello, how are you, do you like Chinese food? They always ask questions about China, but in America, there's like nothing really.
That's true.
So it's not totally. I just think sometimes we have very, very high standards, and we want to go in and really, you know, deliver more than is actually needed or expected. So it's not so bad. Now, let me ask you this: what would you say are some of the pros and some of the cons for teaching in China, either short term or long term? Like if someone was going to go to China to teach for their very first time, and again they knew nothing about it, or they're curious, they're thinking about going. What would you, and they want an honest, you know, not a sales pitch or not a recruiter, but they want to know honestly from someone with as much experience as you, what are some of the pros and what are some of the cons of living and working in China?
Okay, in easy life, there's less hours. If you work at a university or middle school, like where I am, you can get a good salary for not working very hard, not a 9 to 5. And if you was to go to an international school where you are working 9 to 5, you know, you get a huge salary as compared to England. So the money's definitely one of the pros, and I believe it's why the majority of foreigners are there. Food is cheap. Houses are usually provided. So these are all good things. Of course, if you're a single man, Chinese women is, it could be hazardous dating them, but eventually, you know, you'll find someone who's quite pretty and probably younger than you. You know.
Now, what about for Western women in China? What do you think their dating prospects are like?
Well, they seem to be not interested in all the Western women I've met are not interested in Chinese men.
And isn't that interesting? Because a lot of people and myself have noticed that when you go to China, you'll see a lot of Western dudes with Chinese girlfriends or wives, but almost never will you see a white woman or a black woman or a Western woman with a Chinese man. Like I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I've never seen it. No, I take it back. I did see in Beijing. I think in my apartment complex, I had I never talked to her, but she was either a Russian or Eastern European woman. You know, blonde hair, blue eyed, and she had I believe a Chinese husband that she was living with. So it's not impossible, but it's very, very rare, and I think that's interesting.
I think if Western women want to date out there, they'll definitely find Chinese guys. There's a lot of available ones, so they'll definitely get that.
So it's the Western women who don't want to date the Chinese men, and not the other way around.
That's the impression I get. I think they would love a lot of the Chinese men, as we find Chinese women exotic. I think they find Western women exotic. A lot of the Chinese men, but they seem not to be interested in them. So these are the pros. So, you know, But at the same time, the cons are loneliness, especially if you don't know how to speak Chinese. You're going to get very lonely, and even if you
Yeah,
do know how to speak it, you're not going to find the same identification. As we said, they're not well read. It's superficial.
right.
Um,
Yeah, you
and
won't necessarily have a great social life if you go to China. If you're like a very, very social person and you like to go out all the time, it can be a hard adjustment. If you're more of an introvert and you enjoy solitude and you enjoy, reading or independent traveling, it can be great. And again, you can go to a city like Beijing or Shanghai and find other foreigners and like a nightlife and have that. But
yeah,
yeah, you're not gonna have the same social life you probably
if you
are
don't
used to.
if you don't drink as well, then a lot of stuff to do is off limits. There's a lack of things to do in China, like museums and interesting things to see. I mean, you can go and travel to cities that have got that, but if you're living in a backwater like me, you haven't really got a lot to do except go and sit in a coffee bar if you don't drink. Otherwise, you'll be in the
Right,
bar. So
right.
I never joined, a football club or anything like that because there isn't really much of that around, or a
There's
meditation.
not a lot of options. Yeah, it's definitely good to go to China with like some hobbies and some goals, like if you were, for instance, like to be a writer, like if you want to write a novel or a screenplay, I would say, yeah, go teach in China for a year or two, get a job that's 10 to 20 hours a week, and then use all that free time to like pursue that hobby, to write that novel, whatever. Um, but
Mm.
yeah, sometimes it depends on your it's just good to have hobbies
My
and to
friend
keep
did.
yourself busy.
My friend in Beijing. He's an IELTS examiner. He doesn't live there anymore. The one I told you about. He loved tennis and he joined a tennis club, and it was all well, not like a tennis club. They had to rent the tennis pitch, and it was really expensive, and it was all rich people. Whereas in England, you get a tennis court where you don't even have to, in a park where you don't have to pay for it. And if you do have to pay for it somewhere, it would cost nothing, and normal people would be going. But it just seems like it's some sort of Western specialized sport. And he just said the atmosphere felt fake there. A lot of what they do, as in clubs, or it
Right, and
feels tried.
this again comes back to what I mean about a lack of substance, like this vacuous, superficial, surface level image. It's all about like again the image, the perception, the face, and not the you know it's just surface level. Not again like no substance. I find.
Mm. Vietnam's different. Strange that I'm going to leave here actually, um,
Yeah.
but I've got no choice. I've got no good job offers, so I'm going.
Let's go to my last few questions and wrap it up.
Okay.
So, what would be some you kind of might have gone into this a little bit, but let me ask you, what would be advice you would give to someone going to China to teach for the first time? What should they know, and how can they prepare? Let's make that my last question. What would be some advice you would give someone going to China the first time? What should they know? How can they prepare? Are there any, books they should read? Are there any things they should bring from back home? What's your advice?
I would definitely read a history of China. I recommend a huge history of China by John Key. It's called China. John
Like
Key. That's spelled Keay. That's the best history of China.
Keay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the best history of China I've ever read,
Okay.
because there's a lot of things people don't know about, like the Taiping Rebellion. You've read about that, Brandon, haven't you?
Is that the one with the Chinese guy declared he was Jesus's brother?
Yeah, that's right. His name was what was his name? Hong Xiu Chuan. What was his name?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
I've read about that.
so if you went to like Nanjing, you'd know. I mean, it gives a romanticism to a place that otherwise wouldn't be there, and they have got some of
Mhm.
the old wall in Nanjing weaving in and out of its modernity. I
Uh-huh.
like that along that wall, thinking, this is where the Taiping were. It's the bloodiest civil war in history, but it gives you a sense of where China is and where it was. If you're going to read that book.
Are there any other books? What about like Wild Swans? Did you ever read that? That was about the Cultural Revolution.
I did read it. Yeah, I liked it. It's a very simple book, straightforward. It's page turner. I like that.
Yeah.
That'll give you an idea of how fucking cannibalistic the Cultural Revolution was. They just ate each other up in that. Not literally, but well, sometimes they were.
Sometimes, yeah, there was some cannibalism. Yeah.
Just how the culture is eroded by that. But I wouldn't read that and then try to enlighten the Chinese as to how terrible it is. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
It's always good to appreciate just how long its history is and the events in it. So yeah, that's sort of middle-brow literature. It makes it more enjoyable than John Keywood. One of the best books I ever read on China was Paul Theroux, Riding the Iron Rooster. I think.
Paul Theroux. I have some of his books. I want to read that book. I haven't read that yet. But yeah, Riding the Iron Rooster. That's what it's called, right? Yes. Riding trains around in China. What was this in the 80s or the 90s? I think
it's the 80s. But it was a page turner, and it just showed you what is similar in China today, but also what's different.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Great book that is.
Yeah, he's a good writer. He's a good writer.
It's Lou Theroux's father, Lou Theroux.
Yeah, I like him too.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah. Now the Analects by Confucius, I've read that and I find it so dull and dry, and again it's kind of useful, but whenever I read like in college, Plato or Western philosophy, Nietzsche, I felt stimulated. I felt like, oh, there's some interesting ideas in here. I'm not sure how I feel about this, and I would sit down and think about it. Whereas whenever I would read Confucius, I just was like, okay. It just didn't stimulate me.
It's so boring, isn't it? And it just seems the same thing again and again and again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't read that. Just go and read a dictionary definition of Confucianism.
That might be sufficient.
Yeah, or a Wikipedia page. That'd be enough.
Yeah, maybe.
That. And the Dream of Red Mansions. I read that. It wasn't bad, but again, huge work. To be honest, I finished it. I read half of it. But it didn't impress them. If you could say you've read that, and they always say in Chinese. No.
Yeah.
But those are enjoyable books. I read a good book called In Manchuria. That's about an American who lives up in Dongbei for a year.
Okay.
Just in a village. He's married to a woman up there.
Sorry, go ahead.
It just talks about what changes China and its rural China is going through. And the companies buying up the land, and these independent farmers are disappearing, and the young are going to the cities. Another great book is Factory Girls.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. That's by Peter Hessler's wife, I think. He wrote 2 years, Rivertown, 2 years on the Yangtze.
I've got Peter Hessler's book. I've never read it though, that one. But
that's a famous one. That's a popular one.
That was Sichuan, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was in the 90s with Peace Corps. That's a really popular one.
And he wrote also in Beijing, didn't he? Something about Beijing as well, living there.
Yeah.
Leslie Jung wrote Factory Girls, and she talks about girls who work in the factories. My first dissertation for my BA was on this. I wrote a short story about girls in a factory in China.
Okay.
It's kind of influenced by that, partly.
I just thought of there's one book I would recommend to again, Western teachers going to China. It's by an American woman, and maybe she went like a decade ago. I don't remember exactly, but the name of the book is Pretty Woman Spitting. I forget the name of the author. You can find it on Amazon, and I think she just self-published it, and it's just kind of a memoir. But I read it, and there's actually a lot of memoirs about people who've lived in China, and that was one I really enjoyed. And I think she was in Anhui province, and she visited Nanjing and Beijing. And I found her observations and experiences to be just spot on. It kind of just everything that she documented, I was like, yeah, I've experienced that, or yeah, I know what she's talking about here. I think that's a really good book for anyone who wants to, even if people don't want to go to China, if they just want to know what it's like, I would say that's a great book to know what some of the experiences are.
What about The Fake Celebrity in China? Remember that?
I've read about half of that. It's pretty good. I actually forgot about it, but that's a bit more raw, I would say. That's a bit more edgy. Pretty Woman Spitting, I'd say, is a little bit more tame, more friendly.
Right.
But yeah, go ahead.
Robert Black got deported for that. Right, Fake Celebrity deported.
Did he got kicked out for that? He got deported?
Yeah, someone hacked his computer because he was posting and arguing with people on the Beijinger. Someone hacked into his computer and found out who he was, and he was deported for it.
Wow.
I wrote a memoir.
Yeah.
I never told you that, my real name on the memoir.
Oh, okay.
Because I lived there, I don't want anyone to know. It's similar to Robert Black.
Yeah, okay. Well, we won't let's not get too deep into that. So we talked about some books and some reading. We got maybe a few more minutes. We've been going for a while, but yeah, just again, what would be some advice you would tell people like coming to China for their first time? Like, are there any, what are there certain things you think they should bring that they can't find home? Are there certain just how can they prepare, like maybe mentally and in terms of just, again, bringing things? Do you think people should try to learn a little Chinese before they go? What do you think?
I think it always helps you, and it impresses people to learn Chinese. I think that's a good idea. If you're a reader, bring some books. Yeah, get a Kindle. Get a Kindle. Forget about. Yeah, it's just Kindle. It's what I do now. 5 years. Download all my books from the Pirate Bay. 3,000 titles on it. I've got a library on my Kindle. Otherwise, you're not going to find books in China. So if you're a reader, buy a Kindle. Can't stress that enough. I would say have an air of tolerance. Definitely, don't have expectations on China like, oh, it's some kind of inhumane, oppressive regime. It's not. You're left. Are you there, Brendan?
Yeah, I'm listening. I'm just listening.
Yeah, you're untroubled in China. You don't get trouble. You might get a bit of xenophobia, especially now in comments or dark looks, but
right.
You're going to be left to your own devices as long as you don't cause trouble. So yeah, but all those things you do see, maybe dark looks, be prepared for it and tolerate it. Really, I think one of the is the undoing of many an expat is how we stay there, usually for the money, and complain about it, and it becomes a litany, and it's self-defeating. Really, I mean, it's because if you don't like somewhere, you should leave it. Really,
right.
And this includes me. I stayed there for the last 2 years, and increasingly just complained about it, which didn't help me. It didn't make the day go by better. It was enjoyable to complain about it, but it didn't.
I guess it's a way. It's a way to blow off some steam, to get out some frustration.
As long as it doesn't become pathological. I'd also warn them if you're going to get married to the Chinese, it's not an easy thing, and it will be transactional. Families will expect money. You will have to pay, possibly for houses. It's not just an easy thing of saying, "I'll marry you and we'll put our money together and we'll try and make a life together." It's more like
you marry the family, and if you're a guy, you've got a lot of responsibility. You got to take care of everybody for life.
You might get lucky and find a good one. Probably one in every 10,000.
Yeah.
Every 10,000, it doesn't expect that and loves you for you.
Now let me go back to something you said earlier, because you were saying, and again, I think I know where you're going, what you had in mind, but I want to get it on record. So a lot of teachers, they get frustrated. They complain a lot. What do you think it is? What is it that living in China can be so aggravating to foreigners? And what do you think are some of the common complaints? What are some of the things that irritate Western people about living in China. What do you think?
It's usually the spitting, isn't it? A lot of people always complain about that. But it's
why don't you explain that a little bit? Because when you say that, I know what you're talking about, but someone listening to this who's never been to China is like, what does he mean by spitting? Like, can you explain that a little bit?
Well, often in the street, everywhere you'll hear, it's usually older Chinese actually. They'll go, they clear their mouths, and that'll be everywhere. You'll hear that, dozens.
Constantly.
Yeah, constantly. So it can be quite sickening, especially if you're in a restaurant and someone does it in there. That happens sometimes. Sometimes even it depends on the level of restaurant you go to. But it can either disgust you or you just get used to it. I'm a bit of both. Sometimes it might disgust me. Sometimes I might think, nothing of it. It's just them. They do have very bad breath as well, Chinese. I don't know. They do.
Yeah.
You can really smell that when you're in a taxi with a driver.
Yeah, I don't think they have the same appreciation for hygiene that we do. Like a lot of them, from what they've told me, they don't bathe very often. Sometimes, again, they just don't have access to, like if they're students, they might not have access to faculties. But yeah, lots of times bad breath. They don't really wear deodorant. I wear deodorant every day. I brush my teeth a couple times every day. You don't really find that in China, and yeah, that can be difficult for a lot of people. And one thing that frustrates me, and I'm sure you've encountered this again in terms of just hygiene and sanitation, is a lot of public bathrooms are pretty nasty. But even if you go to a mall, sometimes the bathroom, it might be clean, but often there's no soap or toilet paper. And so I would tell people, get used to, if you're going out, carry some like tissue paper and like a bottle of hand sanitizer with you. Don't go out and expect there to be like a clean bathroom and soap. But if you do need to find a good bathroom, often it's going to be a Western place like a McDonald's or a Starbucks. That's where you're most likely to find a clean bathroom with toilet paper and soap. But always, I say, yeah, go out prepared. Have some hand sanitizer, have some tissue paper.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good thing. I mean, people will learn that. Be prepared for sort of bouts of diarrhea as well, because the hygiene is different. The one thing that annoyed me as well is the idiocy. Sometimes you'll go to a restaurant, you'll order something, and the order will come up wrong. Or, I ordered a pizza and then ordered dessert, and it's bring me 2 desserts of the same thing. I didn't order 2 cakes. Just really, but this is daily. You do something and then they get the wrong end of the stick. I mean, it'd be accentuated if you don't speak the language, but I believe I gave instructions a lot of times quite clearly. If you want to hire bicycles now, I've heard you can't do it if you're a foreigner. So be prepared for some xenophobia if you're planning to go back.
Especially now at the coronavirus, I've been hearing that they're really becoming sort of xenophobic, and I don't know how accurate it is, but some people have said some places don't allow foreigners into like the supermarkets and things like that, and you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Brendan, I'm going to go out. I haven't eaten today. I woke up.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, it's about 2 hours of interview, so let me stop recording. Yeah, I appreciate all the content. Let me stop it, and then we'll have a little post chat. So stopping it here.